Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. There is a saying that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Our show today is about something that really has changed and not stayed the same. Come with me today as we talk about a refuge for children and adults who endure sensory issues or challenges. A sensory room can help. These children and adults are sons or daughters, a neighbor, a student, a patient, a coworker. They can now find a safe space, even when they're in some airports or at a Cavs game. The safe place is called a sensory room. 1 in 59 children live with an autism spectrum disorder. That adds up to more than 3.5 million Americans. A sensory room has the power to soothe these 3.5 million neighbors and relatives. To tell us more about this new concept that really has not stayed the same, we have two special guests today. Patrick Scanlon, Cleveland Cavaliers Director of Guest Services, and Paul Schumacher Jr., founder of the Star Room and USC student. So I welcome both of you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Although they say that age has its privileges, we're going to go from younger to older with my first question. And that's my why question. Paul, you were a high school student, actually, in Hudson, at Western Reserve. And you had this idea that you named the Star Room. And you not only thought of it, but you actually produced the Star Room. Why did you come up with this idea?
Well, it all started when my brother Andrew, I grew up with a brother with autism, and he was diagnosed at a very young age. And throughout his, his childhood, it was very hard for him to go places because he was so sensitive to his surroundings, like certain smells, sounds, textures of things would really, really bother him. And that really impeded his ability to go to school. I remember every day when my mom would take me to school, Andrew would come and he would drive by the school on the way. It was a little elementary school, and he'd always say, I want to go to this school. Like, I want to go to school. And Andrew had been in an in-home therapy program for 5 years, and that really wasn't an option for him, just because he'd never really been in a social environment. He's never been in a mainstream environment. And he wanted to go to school so bad, and finally my mom gave in, and she was like, okay, we'll try it out. And it's very hard for families with children with autism to try new things out. And in the first couple years, it was extremely hard for him. My mom would just, if he'd hear the bell between classes, my mom would have to, she'd get called in, and he would have to go home, because there was no place that once he got overstimulated that he could calm down and de-escalate from that overstimulation. So really, after seeing his struggle for about 4 years in schools, I really wanted to make it easier for other families to send their child to school for these children who don't have parents that can go pick them up halfway through school, or drop everything they're doing and come get them. So that's really where it all started, because Andrew, being in a mainstream environment, while it was incredibly tough for him, he learned in those first 2 years of schools, he progressed so much more than he did in his 6 years prior in-home therapy. And I wanted to create an environment in the school that would help other children with autism stay in school longer, so they could also seek those benefits that my brother had of being in a mainstream environment. Because when these children grow up, that's what they need to do. They need to be in a mainstream environment and learn social aspects of society.
So that's the why. So we're going to hold you there and go, Patrick, to you. I ask you the why question. The Cavs offer a lot besides basketball. There's food you can eat, and the games, and the things they throw at halftime, and the big scoreboard, and the fire that comes out of it, and the big screen. So why a sensory room on top of everything else?
To put it succinctly, it was the right thing to do. Once we became aware that there was a population out there that needed these types of services because of extenuating circumstances, it was like one of those V8 moments, that aha moment where we hit ourselves in the head and said, why didn't we think of this earlier? And probably because we were looking through a different lens, that in our daily interactions of life, we're very fortunate that, hey, we get up, alarm goes off, we get ready, send the kids off to school, head down to work, and there we go. But then when we were exposed to the plight and challenges a lot of the members and families in this community had, we said, oh, this is the right thing to do. And the reality is, we had a situation in March of 2016 that we, look back upon and say, that was an opportunity to get better. And we had a situation where a family came to the queue. We weren't equipped enough, or our frontline team members, which there's about 1,500 a night, especially on a Cavs game, to be able to identify and be aware that, hey, this particular individual is having a sensory processing challenge, having a meltdown, if you will. And from that, through serendipity, as we went down a path working with our Cleveland Clinic neighbors, the Achievement Centers for Children, that we were working to train our team on people first language, the ability not only to identify with a guest with these challenges, but to actually interact with them. And so one of our members of leadership from the basketball ops side was on a flight. And if you were to ask somebody in a room, everybody raise your hand who has a family member, coworker, neighbor that either has autism spectrum, PTSD, early onset dementia, Parkinson's, you'd get about 75% of the room to raise their hand. So as these two individuals, one of our members of leadership was sitting next to Dr. Julian Maha from Culture City, they made a connection. Oh, my uncle has this. Oh, my son is on the spectrum. Hey, you should call Anthony Bonavina, our Senior Vice President of Facility Operations in Cleveland, and Patrick Scanlon, the Director of Guest Experience. So Dr. Maha, we got on the phone and started talking about what his concept was. Culture City started this movement in Birmingham by starting sensory rooms and sensory bags and sensory inclusion at the Birmingham Zoo. And of course their aspirations and dreams were like, if we could get into sports venues, this would open up a whole new environment and opportunity for families who have typically felt that they were alienated from those opportunities.
Exactly.
They didn't want the embarrassment, if you will, the exposure.
So did that prevent families from going, or did that prevent them from having the experience that you wanted them to have?
I think it was the experience side, because look, at the end of the day, people are going to be courageous. They're going to roll the dice, right? They're going to send Andrew to school. But if the systems aren't in place, if the collateral is not in place, and more than anything, if the training is not in place, you're set up to fail.
Training 1,500 people is a huge undertaking. And
2,000 with our full-time too, because there's 500 full-time team members.
I'm going to ask you about that in a moment, but if I asked you who thought of it, was it the product of one person or group think, what would be your answer?
I think it was a situation where, Dr. Ma had a vision, and quite frankly, he had a similar situation with another NBA team, to where they were turned away from the doors because they didn't realize that his son used an electronic device for communication. He was a non-speaking autist. And so from that, they said to us, they're like, this is something that we dream and we envision. And we said, well, we've went down this path because of a situation with a local family from Akron. Here's what we worked with the Cleveland Clinic. How could we have a concerted effort to bring this new change, if you will, to the forefront and, be a pioneer, if you will, on effectuating change, not just here in our community, but to have that ripple effect through the league and through the country, if you will.
So when you say through the league, so statistically, how many NBA teams do you know have a sensory room, and has it spread from the NBA?
It has spread. We were very fortunate that we did what we called a soft rollout in November of 2016. We didn't want to announce to the public that we were sensory inclusive if we weren't 100% sure that every team member, from security, guest services, housekeeping, the building crew, and Airmark, was able to not only identify a guest but interact with them. As we went down that path, we said, we're going to do the soft rollout, and we officially launched it in March of 2017. So it's only been a short period of time. We were the first. 19 other NBA teams have joined board. 2/3 of the league is sensory inclusive. There are 3 NHL teams. And I'm really proud to announce that my neighbors, the Cleveland Indians, just became sensory inclusive last week. And my former job, hence my long hair, the Rock Hall became sensory inclusive last month. So we pride ourselves, not only that Cleveland has an opportunity to be the sensory city, because that's what we're looking to do. And obviously our friends down south of us have also had some tremendous starts, and that momentum, we want to keep going.
So Paul, I want to ask you, before we get to what is the sensory room, you know, I'm sure that there were other siblings of other, you know, other brothers, sisters that were somewhere on the spectrum, and they saw the same thing as you, but you did something about it. So if I asked you, why do you think you did something about something that other people just saw, what would the answer be?
Well, you know, it really came down to, it was a big part in my life. Like Andrew having autism, it changed our whole family dynamic. And when he was saying, you know, is it the experience or is it getting them there? Like, we couldn't go to whole family events. Like, we could never go to a Cavs game. We could never go to an event where there's more than, we couldn't even go to the mall together. So, I mean, it was so intense that there needed to be something done. I think that if, like, I started out researching how, like, what this would even look like, a sensory
And when
room,
you
a sensory
started,
space.
did you have any kind of prototype that you could find to look at?
So Andrew actually had a room in our house. This is sort of where the theory, the design theory behind the Star Room comes in. It was just plain. There was nothing in it. It was white walls. It was soft floor. There's nothing in it. There's very little opportunity for sensory overstimulation. And we had to keep our house extremely quiet. So that's sort of where it started. That's where I wanted to base it off of, because if you're trying to help kids de-escalate from sensory overstimulation, you need an environment where they can go to seek that, where it's an environment that's completely void of any distractions. And I just kept researching and thinking of ways to do it, and then I just eventually was like, okay, you know what, let's raise money and let's go build one of these things. And it was such a big part of my life, and that really catalyzed my passion to help people like Andrew who are suffering, and families who are suffering from a similar disability.
And the first one you built was where?
It was in the Glen Oaks School District. So we built one, and it had some of the sensory features that we put into it, and then we built another one that was the complete sensory neutral environment, and both worked very well. The second one a little bit better than the first one.
You learned.
Yeah, you learned, and what it goes back to the training. The training is the hardest part. I mean, it's you can have the room, but if people aren't trained, the people in the school aren't properly trained, then it won't work. It'd actually be worse for the child if they're not
You
trained.
know, for anyone out there listening in our radio audience or watching, if you think that this is not a topic that like interests you or other people, you know, I was worried I might not have enough questions for you guys, and you have so much to cover that, you know, I've gotten like at question 5, you know. So this is really, really an interesting topic, and I thank you for coming here. So we talked about the why. Now let's look at the what. What is a sensory room beyond a room designed to calm and relax someone? So let me start with you. When you put together, because you put together a couple years later than Paul first put together one. Tell us, if we came into your sensory room, what might we see? What would be there? And then I'm going to ask you what wouldn't be in a sensory room.
Gotcha. One, we have a dedicated concierge to greet you. So when the family comes down, or the individual who needs that respite, they walk them through. You know, familiarization of an area really helps with a lot of those elements. We were very fortunate that Dr. Maha from Culture City had a lot of experience. Europe is tremendous with sensory rooms. Their airports, they're sort of on the forefront with having these public spaces. So it really came down to an area that was quiet, austere to a degree, but we, through research, found that there were tactile elements that helped de-escalate someone's overstimulation. So when you walk into our room, it is about a 200 square foot room that was designed with complete intentionality. The colors on the wall were selected, light tones to soothe those elements. We have bubble walls, which are about the size of 40-inch flat screen TVs, LED lights with water and bubbles going in, very soothing, both on a visual and an audio level. We also have tactile elements with we have a latex dinosaur that's about a 4 foot tall, 6 foot wide dinosaur that I initially thought kids would be terrified, but they love it because they get to run their hands over it and feel the different elements. There's also different pieces where we have fidget toys. When you first walk in as well, the first thing you're going to see is a 50-inch monitor with beautiful scenes of beaches from Florida at sunset with the sound of the ocean and birds in the background, as well as a rocking chair, which helps with vestibular movements to bring people's overstimulation down, as well as beanbag chairs that give you a sense of comfort, which we also learned. We have weighted lap pads that we provide to our guests. Same type of thing when you get overstimulated, having that weight on your lap really brings you down. That was something that Dr. Temple Grandin helped sort of innovate in this realm. And again, it's, you walk into the room and it's like, okay, we didn't reinvent the wheel. This isn't splitting the atom. This is saying, okay, let's go in, measure twice, cut once, and be calculating to make sure that we're providing to our guests what they need. Now the reality is, Paul brought little Patrick in there, and I really wanted to watch the game, even though I was having an overload. There's the game feed, but we really try to keep everything and all the excitement levels down as they initially get acclimated to that room.
So Paul, what are some things that consciously are not in? Like, is it gonna have the same sounds, smells? Like, what are some things that are not in the star room?
Well, every child with autism is different, and they have different sensitivities and different things that that don't bother them. So the way that the star room is, and what you wouldn't see in it is, there's when I was doing research, I found a lot of sensory rooms that sort of have a bunch of things that stimulate you in the room. So it'd be lots of lights, lots of too many textures, lots of primary colors everywhere. And it's, you walk in there and it's, to us it'd be like, oh, this is kind of soothing. To a child with autism, this could be like, this is like a laser show. Like it's horrible. So really what our philosophy was, we're gonna focus on the environment. There's other things that you could, like the swings, the chairs for proprioceptive, vestibular, de-escalation, but what we focused on was we wanted to make this room completely soundproof. You can't hear anything from the outside space. All the lighting is indirect lighting. So no, you're never gonna look directly into a light on the wall. All the lighting was thoroughly researched to be no flicker lighting. So wherever you look, if the child has visual sensitivities, they're not gonna be overstimulated. The other thing with the sound component is, we take all the sound out, but the waves and things like that, some children, they don't like that. So it's completely optional for what sound that they want. There's also, HEPA filtration, because children are very sensitive. Some children are very sensitive to certain allergens or cleaners that can be left in the air once the room is clean. So it's there's a different cleaning procedure that the school has to follow when cleaning this room to take those out. All the walls are odor reducing drywall. All the colors are researched to be very tone, like low tone. There's no primary colors, and we put about 70% of our effort into the environment itself, and then we focus on, okay, what else can we put in here that will be universally applicable to a child who walks in this room. So we have the swing chair. Like if you want to go and swing to get some vestibular, stimulation, that's perfectly fine. There's also like bean bags, a ball pit. Children love to go into the ball pit and feel the weight and feel surrounded by, and just sort of swaddled it helps them calm down if they're very, stressed or anxious. So we have those elements in it as well. But our main focus was, if we're building it into a school that has bells, that has smells, that has so many different, if you look into classroom, you have 19 posters on the wall. If we're building in that environment, we want to create the opposite in this school. So when someone walks in there, it's a completely different environment. It's not just like we painted the walls, we designed and engineered the room in every aspect of it to walk in.
You talked about schools. I'm going to ask you in a moment, though. I just want to quickly reintroduce our guest today as we talk about sensory rooms with Patrick Scanlon, Director of Guest Services at CAVS, and Paul Schumacher Jr., who is the founder of the Star Room. Decades ago, when LBJ ran for president, his slogan was a chicken in every pot. So I want to ask you, what is your vision? Is it a sensory room in every athletic venue? Is it a sensory room in every airport? Is it every office building, every home, every school? If you had a vision of what this would look like, if it could look any way that you wanted it to, how many sensory rooms would there be, and what all would they be in, Paul?
Well, I think every school would be a goal to help children learn early sensory regulation tactics that they can go on in later in their life. They can understand more when they're becoming overstimulated and when they need to take a break. And maybe the star room won't always be there, but they'll understand they need a break and they can go seek refuge wherever they feel
Every
comfortable.
school for you focus on, and what would your vision look like?
I mean, I think my vision would be just like what the ADA was to represent with guests with wheelchair accessibility concerns. We have to understand that there's a population, a growing population, that is going to have these needs as we go along. I feel it is our responsibility to a degree to make sure that any public space that someone enters, just like closed captioning, things of that ilk, that there are opportunities for folks to be able to deal with that sensory processing. So, long story short, everywhere.
Now, you had mentioned sensory bags. Is that instead of a sensory room, or is that in addition to a sensory room?
It's an addition. In our application, the sensory room is actually the third in what we consider, not the final, if you will, but we tried A and B, let's go to C and get into the sensory room. The first thing we wanted to provide is a guest who wants to come spend their good hard-earned money and then root on their home team or a visiting team, that they have a place to where they can come and have a sensory inclusive environment. There's a difference though between sensory inclusive and sensory friendly. Sensory friendly means that we would no longer big pyrotechnics, no more a mod on the PA, no more cheerleaders cheering, everything would be toned down. Sensory inclusive, and what the bags provide is an opportunity, tools if you will, for folks to be able to process. In those bags, and they're available every event we hold, all you do is complimentary, you drop off your driver's license, give you a bag that entails sound dampening headphones that are designed specifically to take highs and lows out. We could have a conversation in the bowl during the game, but it would take out the explosions, it would take out things of that ilk. It also includes fidget toys, and more importantly was a laminate. And one out of, I think, every 26 of the children born on the spectrum are non-speaking autists. So we know that population will grow. When our team sees any team member, guest wearing a KC VIP laminate, we know that that guest is non-speaking. Within that sensory bag, there's something called a feelings thermometer. So if Leslie, you had that on, I'd come up and say, how are you doing? And you would point to the little icons and say, I'm good, I'm tired, I'm angry, whatever it might be. Conversely, what do you need? I need a break, I need my photosensitive glasses, I need air, I need water, or sensory room. So it was a really great opportunity.
Or a LeBron autograph.
Yeah.
I hear that about 20,000 times a night.
Was that on the thermometer?
Not yet. We could look to do that though, maybe.
And this has gone so quickly. In the couple minutes we have remaining, I want to ask some questions that are kind of non-sensory room. So, Paul, you have now lived in California for a year. Patrick, you've been in this area for 10 years. What is something that you miss about Ohio when you're in California?
Oh geez, definitely just being around my family. In Andrew and hanging out with them on a daily basis, because when you're 2,500 miles away, it reverts more to FaceTime than in-person contact. So definitely that.
And what is something that you like about Northeast Ohio in your 10 years here?
Growing up in the beaches of Clearwater, Florida, I've come to realize that all my friends as a child all came from Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, the Midwest. And so to me, it's just like coming home to a degree. I love the third collar blue shift, irreverence of what Cleveland in this area represents. And I kind of liken that as me as well.
Now, what is something that would surprise us about Korea in a word or two?
Wow, I've never been. Other than when I came stateside.
See, that surprises
Correct.
us. And what is something that would surprise us about California now that you've lived there a year?
No snow.
Unless you go into the mountains.
Yeah, but in LA, it's beaches. Definitely would be surprising. Go whenever you want.
as often, kind of like voting in Chicago, as often as you can. Autism is the fastest growing developmental disability. There's a prevalence of autism in the United States with children has increased over 100% from 2000. It was 1 in 150. To 2010, it was 1 in 68 and 1 in 59 today. Sometimes we feel helpless and sometimes we can be helpful. In the words of the Cavs, although we are unable to alter the environment during events, we can work with guests to offer multiple options if and when they feel overwhelmed. In the words of Star Room, we have the power to soothe. Both of our guests today are examples of doing something so that things don't always stay the same. Patrick Scanlon from the Cavs, Director of Guest Services, has talked about their new sensory room. Paul Schumacher Jr. from the Star Room. I'm Leslie Ungar for Forum 360. Before we go, I can't let it go without asking 2 words how it's going to be different without LeBron.
We have a new arena coming online.
We do have a new arena?
Well, we're building the transformation of our arena.
And Paul, how's it going to be in California in 2 words with LeBron?
I'm going to go definitely to make it out to a couple games.
I'm Leslie Ungar for Forum 360. Thank you for joining us today.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.